Okay. Hi, YouTube. I want to tell you a story about a hiking trip I recently went on that changed my perspective on Pennsylvania and the landscape that we live in. So, let's get into it. Oh, that was gross. Yeah, so I was hiking in the mountains recently, and I found some things out in the wild of Pennsylvania that I wanted to share with you. It was a profound experience. And there are three things. First, the elk. Second, the feather. And third, the village. Where was I in Pennsylvania, and why does this matter? I think a lot of Pennsylvanians don't realize that in the Ice Age, the glaciers came all the way down to the Appalachian Mountains and smoothed out a lot of the hills. I don't know if people realize that the Appalachian Mountains are one of the oldest, if not the oldest mountain range in the world. The Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania date back 350 million years, something like that. And the Susquehanna River is very, very ancient. It is very, very old. I want to say it's one of the top 3 or 5 oldest rivers in the world. It's right up there in terms of antiquity. It's been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years. I'm not exactly sure what the dates are, but the landscape of Pennsylvania is one of the oldest landscapes on Earth. That's the point. And after the Ice Age worked, the glaciers of the Ice Age eroded the mountains. The people who first came to this part of the world hunted the game that lived in that zone along the glaciers and the arboreal forests that are on the tundra just beneath the glacier. You can see this in northern Canada, what those forests look like. And those forests had tons of different animals that we don't see much in Pennsylvania anymore. Woolly mammoth. There were definitely people hunting woolly mammoth in Pennsylvania. I'm pretty sure that's true. They've found Clovis points along the Ohio River Valley, and I believe in Maryland and other places in Pennsylvania. Please check me in the comments if I'm wrong about that, but I believe they've found Clovis points all over this place. And Clovis points are specific ancient 10, 12, 13, 14,000 year old points that were put on the ends of shafts to then hunt mammoth and other large game. So there are all these ancient animals there, and we don't really think about the fact that there used to be these huge lumbering beasts in the woods, big bears. I don't know if the short-nosed bear was this far east, but certainly there were bears. Not just black bears, which are cute for bears. They're not dangerous, at least not super dangerous, unless you really mess with them. But they're not as dangerous as brown bears, grizzly bears. But short-nosed bears were super dangerous, and I believe there were at least some dangerous bears in this area of some species 10,000 years ago. And one of the animals that's left from that time is the elk. And I don't know if people realize this, but there are still elk in Pennsylvania. And elk are deer. If you've never seen one, they're sort of like large deer. They're sort of between a moose and a deer in terms of size, and they're huge. Their antlers can become, hunters talk about 12-point bucks, and these are magnificent. Elk are magnificent buck. They have huge antlers, and their bucks have huge racks, and they're just amazing. And there's a little place in north central PA where you can go and see elk, and especially this time of year, the elk are very, they're trying to reproduce. It's their mating season. So the bucks, the male elk I'm not sure if they're called bucks. I should check that, but I'll just call them male elk. The males are calling to their mates right now in the woods, and it's called bugling, an elk bugle. So my friends and I, we went hiking up in that part of Pennsylvania, north central. There's a place called Elk State Park, and there's also some state game lands where elk roam. We went to an area called Quahana, and there's a Quahana trail that loops around through Quahana, I believe it's State Park and Quahana State Park, and then state game lands right next to it. And we did about a 20-mile loop in that area and saw an elk. And to me, what was most impressive and really the point of why I'm telling you about the elk is I've seen elk before in Colorado, but this was an experience of the wild in the Northeast that I really associate with the West. You know, I think in the West you can go to these large forests in places like Colorado, California, really anything west of the Mississippi River in the Colorado mountains and beyond. There are huge areas of wilderness that feel ancient. You know, there are canyons there that haven't changed for millions of years. And when the elk came through, the part of I was in Rocky Mountain National Park, and I was camping there with my friends. And in the morning, an entire herd of elk walked through our campsite, and the power and the majesty of those animals, the danger. They didn't care who we were. We weren't a danger to them in their eyes. You know, these are massive beasts. They're a danger to us. That is their land, and they just walked right through our campsite like we didn't belong there. You know, they couldn't have cared less. We were like squirrels to them. We were little ants, rodents of some sort. They didn't care. They came right through, and the massive elk with his 12-point rack of horns and about a dozen or so females around him. They moved right through us, our area. I'll put a video of that right now. So in this most recent trip to see the elk here in Pennsylvania, I had a similar feeling of the power of those animals. We were camping at night, and the elk were bugling into the forest at night. They were calling out, and there's something very eerie about it. You know, it's very scary in a certain sense. I was lying in my tent, and when I first went to sleep, the crickets and the frogs in the forest were still chirping, and we could hear this elk somewhere a couple miles away bugling off into the forest. Maybe like 2 miles away, I would guess, if I had to guess. About 2 miles away, just bugling into the forest. So it was like this haunting call of an elk. And sometimes there were coyotes. And I woke up a few times during the night, and at one point I woke up to all the coyotes calling. And then later, at some point, it must have been early morning, like 3, 4 in the morning, I woke up again, and I heard the elk still bugling, still calling. And this time the forest was dead silent. There were no crickets, no frogs, just me and my tent in the middle of the woods, and far off in the distance, an elk bugling. So I just wanted to share that scene because it made such an impression on me, the power of these ancient beasts, these ancient animals that still walk through the forests of Pennsylvania. They're still here, and it's good if we remember them. So the second story I want to tell you about is this feather. The next morning, after hearing the elk bugling all night, my friends and I continued along our trail, and we were a couple miles along. We crossed the Mosquito Creek and went up further along into the game lands area. I believe we had already exited the game lands by the time this happened. But we were walking along the side of a hill, and I was carrying this pack with me, right? And this pack is quite heavy, maybe 40 pounds, 50 pounds, not 50, maybe like 35, 40 pounds is usually what I aim for with my pack. And it was very hard. I'm still recovering with my ankle. So my ankle was it was the second day. I sprained my ankle earlier this summer, and I've been recovering. And this was the first real backpacking trip I've done all summer. So I was on the second day, and my ankle was feeling weak, and I kept twisting my ankle, and it was feeling sore and weak. So I was taking my time, and my friends were up ahead, and they were deep in some loud conversation. They were talking loudly, and I dropped back because I wanted some stillness and I wanted to take my time because of my ankle, but I also wanted some solitary time in the woods. So I was couple hundred yards behind them maybe. And I realized they'd stopped a couple hundred yards ahead of me on the trail. So I walked along for a couple more minutes, and I could hear them chatting. So I could hear their voices coming closer. And suddenly I came through a little thicket along the trail and out into this clearing, and they were standing around something in the clearing. And as I got closer, they kind of pointed at the ground. And I looked down at the ground, and there was this whole mess of feathers, including this massive feather on the trail. Now this feather, I'm not sure what bird made this feather. It's got to be an eagle of some sort, or at least a hawk, right? Looks like a hawk to me. Could be an osprey. I'm not sure. But look at how beautiful that is. And my friends, they didn't want to keep it, They didn't want to take this out of nature, but I felt like something put it there for us. That's the feeling I had. That's the only way I can describe it, is there was a meaning for this feather to be in our path that day. It was directly in front of us on the trail. And I couldn't help but feel like this was a gift to me and my friends that was given to us by maybe the great spirit of the Lenape, or whatever God you believe in, or don't have to give it a deification, just some spirit, something, some energy brought this to our path. And so I kept it. I took it with me as a gift from the forest. And as I walked along, I thought about the meaning of this kind of an object. And the Lenape Indians, I wonder what they thought about feathers like this. I looked into it a bit when I got home. I Googled around, and certainly turkey feathers were very important in Lenape culture. Lenape used to make these amazing turkey feather capes that they would wear wrapped around themselves. I'll put a picture in right now of some turkey feather capes. And, you know, they also used these feathers. I've seen them as fans or some sort of handheld implement. I'll put some photos in now as well to show you that. But if any Lenape are watching, please in the comments let us know what feather was this, and what do you think it would have been used for in Lenape cultural practices? You know, what is the symbolic meaning of a feather like this? I'd love to know. So please, I'll put some photos in now, and please in the comments let us know. So the last thing I'll say about this feather is when I got home back to Philly, I had it in my backpack. I was carrying it like this. It was sitting in the outer pocket, just like that. And so I was hiking along, walking through the city with this, and someone on the street stopped me and he asked, I guess I had it like that. He asked me, are you a shaman? Just asked me. He was from Africa. And I said, no, I'm not a shaman. I don't think so. Why? And he said in his culture from Africa, he was from the Mbo tribe. Mbo. M-B-O. That's what I remember. Mbo tribe. He said in the Mbo tribe, anyone with a feather like that is a shaman. And a shaman is a medicine man, and a priest, and a healer, and a seer, someone who sees the other, the shadow realm, sometimes can commune with the afterlife, other spirit beings. And so shamans are very powerful in various cultures, and he said that this is a symbol that this feather gives some spiritual, maybe magic powers of some sort. Something I sort of resonated with the feeling I had in the woods when it was lying across our path, and it felt like the right thing to do was to bring it with me along my journey. So I'm keeping this as a memento from this trip. So that's the story of the feather. Next, I'll tell you about the village. Real quick for the fans of my cat, this is Abe. Say hi, Abe. He's missing an eye, you can see. So, you want to bite my finger? Yeah? So Abe is a very friendly cat. But he likes to bite. Why are you biting me? Huh, buddy? So, alright, we're going to put you down now. Whew! Abe is very hairy. I need to brush him more. Oof. So that's the story of the feather, but next I want to tell you about the village. As we were walking along after I found this feather, we came into a gully. And Mosquito Creek empties into a larger creek at this gully, where two creeks meet. And one of them wasn't Mosquito Creek, one of them was a run. I'm forgetting the name of the run. Shoot. But this run met Mosquito Creek. And you know what I always say, where two bodies of water meet is a perfect place for a Lenape village, or any village, Native American village. It probably wouldn't have been Lenape, we were in the mountains, so it could have been even an Iroquois village, but maybe at least a Shawnee, or what were the other tribes? Susquehanna? I don't know which tribes would have been in that area, but one of the Delaware Nation tribes, as they were all sort of lumped together eventually and called the Pennsylvania tribes. One of those tribes would have built their village where these two bodies of water met. So knowing that, I started looking around, and sure enough, there were these massive boulders, and On this trip, I didn't take my camera. I didn't turn on my phone. I actually turned my phone off. And I wanted to disconnect from the modern world completely on this trip. So I don't have any photos of these rocks to show you, but immediately I got the sense that there was a presence there, that there would have been a village site. And I don't mean that in a sort of a woo-woo way, like, okay, I had this feather, so maybe there was something going on. I'm not trying to say even just based on superstition or feeling, anything like that. I'm saying I read the landscape, and there was a perfect area, a flat area above the creek, and then on the hillside were these huge boulders, and they were massive. I want to say that they were the size of school buses, at least. And so and they were arranged in a certain way to where you could have put, if this is one boulder and this is a tree, you could have laid a tree across two boulders and made a dwelling in the space underneath. And there were several of these areas where you could have either laid trees against the boulder or made these little enclosures with trees and boulders. And then, there were also the faces of the boulders themselves seem to have had carved areas, divots at regular intervals, grooves running lengthwise along the boulders, places where you could have put a piece of wood into the hole of the boulder like that to create a rafter of some sort. Or, one of the boulders had grooves in it, almost like knuckles, like that, and you could put limbs of a tree in each of the knuckles, in between each of these knuckles along this boulder. And then there was like a pit under the boulder where you could have gotten out of the rain underneath the stone. Very interesting structures that really, and the proximity to the water, maybe 100 yards, 50, not even 100, 50 yards down the slope along this flat area, and then a creek 50 yards away. You come up the flat area, you could have put long houses and wigwams on the flats, and then boulders where you could have had rock shelters, storage areas to store things for the winter. And in truly ancient prehistoric times, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, you could have had rock shelters there. And the combination of these three things, so those were the three things, the elk, the feather, and the village. And when I got to the village, having heard the elk and seen the elk the day before, having found this feather, and now standing in this place that I'm guessing, was potentially an ancient village site, I had a profound experience of unity and oneness with time and the ancient world. And forgive me if I wax poetic for a minute. I studied philosophy, so this just comes with the territory with me. But it might also be because I'm getting older, and as I get older, I recognize how quickly time is passing, but also how close we are to the past. And when I was younger, I used to think of the ancient world as a long time ago, right? I used to think of it as a long time ago. I used to think of the pre-modern world, before the world wars, the 19th century, when the the American Revolution happened, when when the settlers went west, the gold rush. I used to think of those things as very old. And now I've had experiences, I've traveled around the world, I've been to places in other parts of the world where they truly do have ancient things, truly do have old structures. I've seen Roman villas that look like they were built yesterday. I've seen pueblos out west that are still intact, more or less. Pyramids and structures in Ireland from 10,000 years ago, or 6,000 years ago, I guess. Stonehenge I've seen several times. And then I came to this part of the woods in America and realized I'm looking at a structure like that. And we're not that far away in time from those structures. Reading about the history of Pennsylvania and the history of Native Americans, realized that Native Americans were living here just 250 years ago. They were still in the woods. They were still around. There were still border disputes in the 1750s out west along the Ohio and up in Wilkes-Barre, the Wyoming Valley, which is now called Wilkes-Barre. And yeah, I think maybe, I was looking at these stone structures and then coming back to Philadelphia, coming back to our city and looking around and seeing more stone, like look at this wall. This is stone. It's clay, it's brick. It's brick, but that's a stone. I've been to Machu Picchu and I've seen the gray stone that they built their walls from. It's very similar. That sound of the cars and the motorcycles going past my apartment, that's the modern bugling of the elk. The elk were that loud. The elk were bugling in the forest, and they were that loud. Now I was several miles away, but I could still hear them. Nowadays, instead of rock shelters and feathers and elk, we have brick. And instead of horses, we hear cars go by. And I don't know, I guess we still have feathers, but I don't know what the modern equivalent of a feather would be. But we still have things that mean something to us from the natural world, I guess I also have this huge conch shell, right? We still have objects around us from the natural world, plants, birds, whatever it may be. It made me realize we're not that distant from the ancient world here in Pennsylvania. It's still all around us, and we are part of it. And someday we will be ancient, Someday we will be ancient. We live in this landscape that's constantly changing, it's constantly evolving. Sure, we don't use the gray Wissahickon stone or the gray, what is it, the Wissahickon schist, as it's called. We don't use that to build too many of our buildings anymore, but it was very important a couple hundred years ago to build with, and for thousands of years before that, people lived under the boulders of schist that are all over this landscape around Philadelphia and the Delaware Valley area. Instead of that rock, we use this rock, Instead of stone tools, we have our phone in our hands. Instead of a hand axe, you have a phone. I didn't take any photos of this trip, but my friend took some photos, and here are the photos he sent me of our trip through Quahana Forest in north central Pennsylvania. So there you go. Those are 3 stories about my recent trip to the wilds of Pennsylvania backcountry. North central Pennsylvania is beautiful. If you haven't been, you should go. It's a truly wild place, still on the East Coast, and it's remote. It's out there. So I hope you enjoyed these stories. They This was a very meaningful trip for me. It was healing because it was the first time that I got to go hiking after spraining my ankle. I felt the power of the ancients in the woods with me there. And I came back from the trip inspired to make more videos and do more around Delaware County, Bucks County, Montgomery County, New Jersey, and the Philly area in general. We'll do some Delaware, we'll do some Maryland. And we'll see. The weather's changing now, so it'll be colder and the snow will come. So it might make it a little difficult to find some of these native sites, but try to get out there before the snow comes in the winter, and we'll do some more in the fall. So, thanks for listening to my reflections on my trip, and if you like this video, please give me a like and a subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.